Welcome to the Sober and Happy podcast, where we talk about all things recovery related, how to navigate the challenges that we'll face along the way on our journey towards our best lives, and how we could go from living a life of simply just being sober to a life where we're both sober and happy. Today we're diving into a topic that's personal for me, and I believe for many people on this path, why I chose to stop being anonymous in my recovery. For years, I kept my sobriety and my past struggles with addiction hidden. It was like a secret I locked away, convinced that if anyone found out, it would define how they saw me. The fear of judgment and rejection held me back. But over time, I learned something important. Hiding doesn't protect you. It only keeps you stuck. So today, we're going to talk about the fears that come with being open, the challenges of staying anonymous, how hiding breeds shame, and the freedom and connection that comes with authenticity in recovery. So buckle up. This is going to be a great episode. Welcome back. When I first got sober, I was terrified of people finding out about my past. I wasn't just afraid of judgment. I was afraid of losing opportunities, of being seen as less than, and honestly, of having my mistakes being held against me. I started a new job shortly after getting out of rehab, and since the holiday season was coming up, I was worried about the potential of a company Christmas party and how to handle saying no to a drink. I imagined what would happen if my boss found out I was an alcoholic. If I was legitimately sick and had to miss work, would he assume I was drinking and want to fire me? Would I miss potential promotions because he thought I might be unreliable? And this was just work. I was also worried about all the other situations where someone might ask why I wasn't having a drink. What would I say in social situations? What if I was invited to happy hour with coworkers? Or even how to address it if I was on a first date and my date ordered a drink and asked why I wasn't having one too? I desperately didn't want people to judge me, and in a society filled with alcohol, how was I going to navigate not exposing myself? I was going to AA at the time, so I asked a group in the parking lot after a meeting what they do. They were all quick to offer suggestions. Tell them you have to get up in the morning. Say you're on medication. Tell them that you're driving. They went on, and I felt better armed with excuses I could use if the situation arose when I was offered a drink. At first, staying anonymous seems like the safest option. You tell yourself that it's nobody's business and that you're just protecting yourself from judgment. But the reality is, living in secrecy comes with its own set of challenges. For one, it's isolating. When you're constantly worried about slipping up and revealing too much, it's hard to connect with people authentically because you're putting up walls. The other thing I found out is that it really isn't that effective of a tactic. The main goal in that situation for me was to avoid getting any attention to the fact that I wasn't drinking. And I found that all of the excuses people suggested only created more curiosity or opened up a situation where I had to defend my excuse. Tell someone you have to drive and they will be quick to suggest an Uber. I would tell someone I had plans in the morning, they'd ask, "What are you doing in the morning?" Every time I declined a drink or skipped a happy hour, I felt like I was walking a tightrope, trying to keep track of what excuse I used with which person to not look suspicious. And let me tell you, living that way is exhausting. I was trying to hide my secret out of fear, but as you know, when you're living a lie, trying to keep track of a set of lies also brings its own set of fears. And for me, that fear was all-consuming. But here's the thing, that fear isn't just about other people's opinions. At its core, it's about our own relationship with our past. For me, I realized that as long as I kept hiding my story, I was agreeing with the stigma. I was saying, yes, this part of me is something to be ashamed of. Shame thrives in secrecy. When we keep parts of ourselves hidden, it's like telling ourselves that these parts aren't worthy of love or acceptance. And shame is heavy. It weighs you down, makes you second guess yourself, and keeps you stuck in a cycle of self-doubt. Dr. Brené Brown, who has dedicated much of her life to studying shame, talks about how shame needs three things to survive: secrecy, silence, and judgment. When we hide our recovery or our past, we're feeding all three. We're saying that this part of me is so bad that I can't let anyone know about it. And for years, I carried that shame. Even as my life improved in sobriety, I couldn't fully enjoy it because I was still holding on to this belief that my past defined me. It wasn't until I started opening up that I realized how much lighter life could feel. And it wasn't one big moment. It was a series of small experiences that showed me the power of authenticity. One of the first times I was truly open about my recovery was with a stranger at a Tony Robbins event. We started talking, and for some reason, I decided to be honest with her. I told her about my struggles with addiction, how I got sober, and how it changed my life. She started crying and shared that her son was currently struggling with addiction. She said she was feeling so hopeless, but hearing my story gave her hope that he could turn his life around too. That conversation changed everything for me. It showed me that my story is not a source of shame. It could be a source of connection and inspiration. From that point on, I decided to stop hiding. Around this time, I also started a new job that required a lot of travel, so my job supported many other teams across the country. I knew that this would mean a lot of dinners and after-work gatherings with coworkers, as that was the nature of this job. With my new revelation from that conference, I decided I was no longer going to be anonymous. Now, doing this with a stranger at a Tony Robbins conference is one thing, but doing this when an executive at my company offers me a drink is a whole different level of fear to face. But I knew in my heart I no longer wanted to live in fear and shame, and that it was the right thing to do. On my first out-of-town trip, after a day of meetings, my team went out afterwards to discuss the day and socialize. As soon as we walked into the place, one of the leaders looked at the group and said, "What's everybody drinking?" Now, I have to tell you, when I imagine facing this fear, I imagine me and one coworker maybe sitting at dinner. I didn't imagine facing it in front of a whole group of coworkers, most of whom I just met earlier in the day. As he went around the circle getting everybody's drink order, the fear grew as it got closer to my turn. I imagined every possible worst-case scenario. You know when someone asks you a question in a crowded place where you have to shout so they could hear you and the music stops right as you're shouting? I was sure that would happen, and I would find myself announcing to the whole bar that I didn't drink. It finally got to me, and he asked, "What are you drinking, Tim?" I looked at him and I said, "I will take a Diet Coke." He quickly responded, "Just a Diet Coke? You sure you don't want anything stronger?" Now, at that moment, I was doubting my decision. I figured there'd be an entire interrogation about why I wasn't ordering a cocktail like everyone else. But I looked right back at him and I said, "No thanks, I don't drink." And then I waited. I waited for everyone to notice what I just said. I waited for them to judge me and not want to socialize with me that night. But something funny happened. Without skipping a beat, he said, "Diet Coke it is," and then he moved on to the next person. Wait, I thought, that was it? I was 7 years sober at this point and had been dreading this exact moment the whole time. People told me why it was better to remain anonymous, and all the fears I carried for all those years were for nothing? And that wasn't even the best part of the night. Later in the night, we had a chance to talk away from the rest of the group. Now, I honestly think he realized that he might have put me on the spot for declining the drink. So as we talked, he asked me, "You don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but is there a reason why you don't drink?" I told him that I used to drink, that my drinking got out of control, and that I realized I needed to stop. Here's the thing. He wasn't being nosy. He genuinely wanted to know more about me. The more we talked, the more I felt comfortable, and the more I opened up that I didn't just have a little problem, and that I'd spent a couple of months in rehab several years back. As with most people, he knew people who struggled with addiction, but said that he didn't know anyone who had conquered it, and that he admired me for doing that. I was blown away as I listened to his opinion of me for being sober. All this time, I worried that people would judge me and think less of me. Yet as I sat there and listened to him talk about how he saw it, he used words like character, strength, and resilience. He ended the string of compliments by putting his arm around me and saying, "You should be proud of yourself." The first thought that came to my mind after hearing that is, damn right I should be proud of myself. And that goes for you too. If you're listening to this right now, I want you to hear this. You deserve to feel proud too. Recovery isn't easy, and the fact that you are here making the choice to grow and heal speaks volumes about your character. You don't have to carry shame anymore. You earn the right to stand tall and own your story. When I stopped hiding, I started to see how much power my story could have, not just for me, but for others. people began reaching out to me, sharing their struggles and asking for advice. I started to feel like my experiences had a purpose, like they could be used to help others. It also transformed my relationships. When I was honest about my past, the people who cared about me didn't judge me. They supported me. And those who did judge, those are the same people who will look for something to judge me for anyways. If it weren't for my past addictions, it'd be for what I was wearing, the way I talk, where I live, or what I drive. And honestly, I learned that they weren't people I needed in my life anyways, so let them judge. But the biggest change was within me. By being open about my recovery, I was finally able to let go of shame. I stopped seeing my past as something to hide and started seeing it as part of my story, a story that includes struggle, but also includes resilience, growth, and hope. If you're listening to this and thinking about whether to be more open about your recovery, I want you to know this. It's okay to be scared. It's okay to take your time. But I also want to remind you that hiding doesn't protect you. It keeps you stuck. When we share our stories, we create space for connection, understanding, and change. We help break the stigma around addiction, not just for ourselves, but for everyone who's still struggling. We give others permission to do the same. Thank you for listening to this episode, and I hope you enjoy the podcast. If you are, please do me a favor, grab your phone and text one person who you think might benefit from listening to this episode. That would mean the world to me. New episodes come out each Friday, so I look forward to connecting with you next week. And as always, thank you so much for listening and keep living sober and happy.